Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 27th of March 2024. I'm a little bit behind today, apologies. I'm going to split my the two segments to this second news video into two separate videos because there's so much data to go through. Right, let's start with military aid and equipment. The board of the World Bank today approved $1.5 billion for Ukraine. I say today, that's yesterday, under the development policy DPL loan. $984 million came from Japan and $516 million from the UK. Although these are loans, there are things that are going on behind the scenes with other nations. I've been a little bit critical of the UK and what it hasn't been doing of late in terms of, as a percentage of GDP, what we're helping Ukraine with. But of course, we don't have that much military equipment due to our own underfunded military and stockpiles. But there are things the UK does do that I think, although this is a loan and the idea is you get that back plus some, but there are things that the UK does do that isn't just in terms of military equipment. So when we see these military equipment lists, remember, and that's the same with the US, there will be all sorts of things that the US will be doing behind the scenes that will help the Ukrainians that won't turn up on a military equipment donation list. We will use these funds to cover the most important budget expenditures for social and humanitarian goals, as well as for reconstruction. Grateful to the governments of Japan and the UK, President of the World Bank Group Ajay Bonga, and to who is this? Anna Bier, the Managing Director of Operations, for their support. So that's good news. And money is, of course, insanely important for Ukraine in order to stay afloat. And actually, Ukraine have got a little bit frustrated. Ukraine seeks an additional 5 billion euros from frozen Russian assets in the EU to support its war effort, as Euroclear retains profits from investing these assets. The EU proposes using 90% of the proceeds from frozen assets to purchase weapons for Ukraine, but restricts it to revenues accrued after February the 15th, 2024. Euroclear, holding 192 billion euros in Russian state assets, keeps 5 billion euros as a buffer for potential lawsuits. The funds are intended to cover expenses, risks, and loss incurred due to the war in Ukraine. And I guess Ukraine's a little bit frustrated that, in a sense, Euroclear is making money out of frozen assets, frozen Russian assets, and Ukraine, I guess, is saying, look, that needs to be apportioned. But then, obviously, there are arguments that they do need a legal buffer zone in case this comes back to haunt the EU, or in this case, Euroclear. But handover missing 5 billion euros in Russian asset profits, Ukraine tells the EU. Moving on, the EU has granted over 130 million euros to Rheinmetall, the German arms manufacturer, for ammunition production expansion. Rheinmetall's European subsidiaries will undertake 6 projects across Germany, Hungary, Romania, and Spain. That is EU getting involved in defence production and investing in that and getting onto a sort of war footing for the EU and member nations to be in a better position going forward in terms of security. We'll come on to this in the this next tweet actually. So this is where I was going. France, this is so significant. France is ready to requisition weapons production facilities to help Ukraine, according to French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu. According to him, the French government is ready to use its powers to requisition industrial facilities or set priorities for weapons manufacturers to speed up the production of weapons and shells needed on the battlefield in Ukraine. This is getting onto a proper war footing. France is really following up the rhetoric and positioning of Emmanuel Macron with tangible changes to their policies, to how they are supporting Ukraine. I cannot fault the trajectory that France are now on at the moment. I'm full of respect for the way that they have turned things around. I hope it's sustained. I hope they don't get punished at the polls for doing so. This is incredibly important, and seeking to put the country onto a kind of quasi-war footing is so critical to France being in the right position going forward in terms of their own security, but also in terms of European security, global security, and Ukraine's prevailing in the war against Russia. I think kind of like the Defense Productions Act or whatever in the US, which is the state saying, look, if you're not going to play ball, if you're not going to do exactly what's needed, then we're just going to take you over and make sure stuff happens. As a state entity, you don't have to be answerable to shareholders, and so therefore trying to predict like manufacturing against investment, against return on investment, etc., etc. The state just comes in and say, right, I don't care whether it makes us money or not. I don't care if we turn a profit. We're going to make a shed load of stuff and we're going to ship it off to Ukraine. And actually, in certain contexts, the free market is where you want to go. In another context, the state needs to just take control and get stuff done. So I think that's a really significant evolution of how things are going in France. France will also, as I've mentioned a number of times, deliver 78 self-propelled howitzers, Caesar howitzers, to Ukraine. This is stated by French Minister Sébastien Lecornu as well as 80,000 shells. I have said this several days recently, but it's the idea that that's going to soon be delivered. I still don't know the timing on that. I can't imagine that you're suddenly going to have 78 built and then ship them. It's going to be like, well, okay, build and send, build and send, build and send. But the idea is maybe that 78 is soon going to be delivered. If anyone has a time frame on that, I'd be interested. Slovenia is joining the Czech ammunition initiative for Ukraine, according to Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky. That's good news. And in terms of the Czech Republic initiative, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Czechia said that the initiative to supply 800,000 shells, which is promised by his country, may indeed increase to 1.5 million, as has been expected. In fact, I think the funding is broadly there for that much, but it's about getting the funding from those pledging nations actually to, I guess, Czechia or wherever the funding needs to go. There's one thing saying you're going to pay, and there's another thing passing over that money and then getting those orders in and getting them looked over and then shipped to Ukraine. It's a long process. We can do much more than the originally announced number of 800,000, said Jan Lipavsky, again, in an interview with Bloomberg, naming 1.5 million shells as a potential volume. According to him, this already helps Ukraine fight better. Quote, they know they will have fresh ammunition, and this has changed their attitude towards the use of existing stocks. This is so important, right? We have seen them start to use much more artillery of late. And it's not that the shells from the Czech initiative have got through to them, but it's the fact that they know. This is why it's so important. They know what aid they are going to get, why the US aid package was so important, because if you expect that to come in, then you say, right, we're going to use our Bradleys like this because we know we're going to get more. We're going to use our Stingers like this. We're going to use our Javelins and our artillery ammunition. Okay. Oh, right, we're not getting that. Oh my God, we've run out because we have been using all this stuff in terms of the prediction of what was coming in. And so what you do now is somehow kind of defined by what you know you've got coming in. So if they know they've got the Czech initiative shells coming in, then you can use up existing stocks. So certain artillery units have been conserving their own stocks. So it's not that they've got literally nothing, they can't fire anything. It's they know that if this is all they've got, they need to eke out this stuff for as long as possible. So they're firing off a couple of rounds a day or whatever it is. They've got a bunch of stuff there, but that's got to last how long? Who knows? 6 months. And now you've got this new stuff coming in. The predictions there. It's like, right, okay, we can fire that all off now. And so they're just using up their stocks rather than new stuff that's arrived. At the same time, he refused to say how long it would take for the supplies to reach the front line. And that's obviously going to be the $1 million question. Now, the Ukrainians are busily building their Bogdanas, which are their self-propelled, kind of look a little bit like the Caesars, self-propelled howitzers. This is a production line. Goodness knows where. It's going to be somewhere in the west. And the Russians will be wanting to find out where such a facility is, and they will want to hit it, no doubt. But good to see that they are working hard on those, and they are finding their way to the front line. I've seen training videos of these being used recently, so they are more numerous than certainly they were originally when there was only 2 sort of prototypes. Now, here we have something coming from a Greek source. The translation of this is interesting. So this is, basically around 50 Ukrainians, were on our flight from Athens to Warsaw. They were at Swada or Suda, don't know how to pronounce that, for training. Now, this is the understanding that they were training on S-300s. For context, Suda at Chania, and this is coming from someone that sent me this, so thank you for Digital Forward Observer, on the island of Crete is where Greece has their S-300s stationed. These are the old Soviet surface-to-air missile system that Ukraine definitely needs. Originally, the S-300s were bought by Cyprus, but Turkey threatened a military action if the batteries were activated, leading to a very serious crisis. After negotiations, the S-300s were transferred to Crete and have remained there since. And I believe these Ukrainians have been over in Greece training on these S-300s, and that means that if they're flying back, you could imagine these S-300s are going to find their way to to Ukraine, to somewhere in Ukraine. I'd love to see stuff like this nearer the front lines. If they have enough of them to spare so that they can challenge the Russian airframes dropping those bombs. Greece also plans to sell F-16s and Mirages to rationalise its fighter inventory. So basically, they've got too much of a wide array of airframes, and they want to cut that down. I presume that's how I understand it. Too diverse, reduce its diverse combat aircraft fleet, so the footprint isn't so big, the logistics isn't so complicated, and they're getting new stuff in from the US. I believe it's at F-35s and whatnot, so they're getting rid of some of their older stuff, which is what Ukraine definitely need. Now, I don't know how updated these are, but F-16s and Mirages, if they are of the right variant, would be very useful for Ukraine indeed. So I wonder if some of those could end up in Ukrainian hands. Moving on to sort of US stuff, Saab will establish a new munitions production facility in the US, which will produce, among other things, the adapter kits for the ground-launched small-diameter bomb, which they and Boeing are delivering to Ukraine on a USAI contract. This is the missile, the old, I don't know whether they're taking a dumb sort of rocket and they attach a kit to it to turn it into a missile that has guidance and extra range capabilities on top of what the original rocket would have been. But you take cheap sort of outdated munitions, you're updating them, and you can fire them to a range of 150 kilometers from a HIMARS or similar. And this then gets over the issue of not having HIMARS rockets to fire, like ATACMS or something like that. If you can get a bunch of GLSDM, it's a bit like GLSDB, sorry. It's a bit like the JDAMs from the airplanes, taking cheap, dumb bombs and giving kits to them. You're taking older munitions, giving them kits, and hopefully this is a cheaper way of getting effective ranged attacks. Sites in 6 different states are being considered for the location of the new facility, which ground will be broken on by the end of the year. I presume that means they're going to be building this facility by the end of the year. Of course, all these things are long-term contracts and projects. Of course, Ukraine needs as much stuff as they can get right now. The US possesses 1,106 Patriot protection systems, and this is coming from someone. I don't know if that is actually just the launchers, and actually they don't have. Someone else was saying they've got like 50 Patriot systems, and as I understand, have given one Patriot thereof to Ukraine. So I think this is someone getting confused between launchers and batteries. But the US has given them one battery. Unfortunately, Ukraine cannot well protect their citizens against Putin's missiles with the amount of stuff they've got. They need more. But yeah, that's nonsense. The US has something like 60 to 70 systems. So it depends. If you're talking about launchers, then a battery will have multiple launchers, and that will make sense of that number. But the broader point is the US has a lot of these bits of kit, but they're all positioned in places that are vital for the US's national security. So it's quite difficult for the US to suddenly. It's not like Bradleys where you got 6,000 Bradleys or whatever. It's like, yeah, most of those in storage. We can give them a couple of hundred Bradleys. Actually, really, they can give them like 3,000 Bradleys, and it still wouldn't make all that much difference. But you get the point. Whereas Patriots are very different. You'd be taking them from, I don't know, Washington, or protecting a nuclear silo here, or whatever it is. US would need that. They have a number of them abroad as well, I believe. So yeah, US hasn't given a great number of these, but whether they are helping to procure them through either Raytheon or RTX directly or whatever, I don't know. But yeah, there seems to be a little bit of a criticism of the US there. Now, there is, I think, a due criticism for Musk's Starlink at the moment, because Russian forces may be using Starlink terminals in Ukraine despite US sanctions prohibiting Russia's access to Starlink, and that's coming from Western media variously. CNN has cited Ukrainian troops seeing increased Russian use of Starlink, and claims from Russian crowdfunders are purchasing Starlink from tech from third-party countries. Now, here's I could play you this, but it's 4 minutes and 20. It's a really good snippet on CNN about Starlink. Several things here. That one, Ukrainians are targeting Starlink unit. You can see these big white boxes, and quite often they can actually see them with their drones, and they are targeting them because they know how important they are. From that news segment, some other nuggets that are super important. One, Ukrainian Starlinks are working at half the speed at the moment, in many cases, according to people on the ground. Two, they're not working particularly consistently either. They have to keep rebooting them. Now, is this something that is an issue coming from Starlink that's a purposeful thing, trying to stop Ukrainians using Starlink as effectively as possible? Is there some Russian influence coming into Musk's Starlink, or is this a genuine, just they've been using a long time, they're slower? I don't know, some issues. The other area that they talk about in this is the ability, or the conceptual ability for Starlink to be able to turn off individual systems, and knowing who they are, who the systems are, and then who they're owned by could be a complication. But which account they're associated with. But in principle, that should be able to happen. Now, here's the issue, right? And correct me if I'm wrong with this analogy, but if the Russians were driving into the war zone on in and on Bradleys, right? If they were using US-made Bradleys to attack Ukraine, if the Russians were utilizing American kits to attack Ukraine, I'm sure the US would be going absolutely mental about that. So why is it that the US is not going mental, or at least not on the surface going mental about them using kit that is used to destroy Ukrainian troops and equipment, to destroy Ukrainian American Bradleys, right? They are using Starlink to do that. You would go mental if you saw that the Russians had got hold of Javelins and Bradleys on the open market, right? The US would be absolutely coming down. There would be sanctions, there would be investigations. Why the hell do Russia get away with using Starlink? Why has Musk not been hauled over the coals about this? I don't get it. There's a double standards going on here, and Musk has too much power, and I'm not a fan of him, but this ain't helping. Anyway, that's a really fascinating 4.5 minutes of segment there. There's one Ukrainian saying, Musk is like a big baby, basically, and the way you've got to talk to him is like this, talking about how to get him to change his ways with interesting insight anyway to how some people see him. So the black market for Starlink, according to Bloomberg, terminals grows bigger worldwide. They're used in Yemen, Venezuela, Sudan. Terminals are also noticed by the Russians at the front. US President Joe Biden's administration may tighten export controls on Starlink to prevent terminals from going to hostile nations. I don't understand why not. I mean, this is almost more important than these are more important than, say, Bradley. It's more important, or it's more problematic, that the Russians are using a single Starlink than it would be using a single Bradley. You can do more, right? Just something has to be done there. Am I right? Prove me wrong. Russian military reporter Sladkov, who is again one of these kind of Igor Girkin, 13th Romanov type people, claims that 50,000 North Korean Spetsnaz, so special forces, are ready to join the war on the Russian side, in addition to 800,000 regular troops. We are concerned for the welfare of this potential force, who may disappear into nothingness as the 10,000 Syrian volunteers did a year ago. Well, my goodness, if they are, again, it's about moving the Overton window. You start talking about this, normalizing it, then when it happens, everyone's been prepared for this. Like, will we get to a point where North Korean soldiers are seen on the front lines in Ukraine? What effect will that have on allies' opinions and positioning on using their own forces, so on and so forth? How will that affect South Korea's positioning? But interesting. Will it ever happen? I don't know. Is it just hot air? Possibly. But, something to think about. Now, a chap called Ben here has done some massive analyses, huge analysis here on uh, artillery and self-propelled artillery numbers by looking at all the vast deposits, stockpiles of these with satellite imagery across Russia. I mean, this is a huge, huge thread that I won't go into now. I've done one of his threads, I think, before on the numbers of certain bits of kit. But anyway, I think the TLDR of this, you can see how long that thread is and how involved it is. The TLDR by someone else summarizing it down here is that they have something like 18,000. Here it is. I concur with you. The analysis is fine and the assumptions reasonable. Summarizing, Russia started with 23,500 artillery systems. So that's both towed artillery and self-propelled guns, of which 5,500 were in active service. So out of the 23,500, they've got 18,000 stored variously and 5,500 being used around the Russian armed forces and then into Ukraine. Now there's 9,500 artillery pieces. So that's reduced from 23,500 to 9,500, which is a massive reduction of almost 12, or that is, that is 14,000. No, that's a loss of, my goodness, yeah, 14,000. Right, so my maths just went crazy there. So to think that they've lost 14,000 potentially bits of kit is incredible. Although of course some of those could be involved in being taken to be dismantled. So rather than being used, cannibalized, and so on and so forth. So out of that 9,500, 4,500 in service. So they have 1,000 fewer pieces being used in Ukraine. So fewer pieces, and they have much smaller stockpiles to draw from. And they're moving from self-propelled to towed artillery because they are running out of self-propelled artillery. So you're moving to the poor cousin of that. You want shoot and scoot. You want to be able to move and probably have greater range with some of the self-propelled artillery than you do out the older D30s and D20s and D10s and whatever, the older towed artillery. But the Russians appear to be moving from self-propelled to towed, and what they're using is of worse quality, as the parts they're cannibalizing are poor. They're not getting there is someone was saying elsewhere, don't they build them. There is no evidence that Russia is building artillery at all, particularly towed artillery. The last place that was building it some years back has gone out of business, and so yeah, they're not producing new ones. Where does this put them going forward? I think Ben was saying 15 months if it was everything was going at the same trajectory, but there's so many variables there that actually if you're only left with really poor stuff, then that would affect whether that is actually 15 months worth of stuff or whether that is 6 months worth of stuff, because actually you just can't use it. Anyway, since I published my analysis on remaining Russian artillery stocks, and that was back from February, the most common question has been, why is it so difficult for Russia to produce more artillery units and barrels? Well, basically because they don't have the production facilities for them anymore, it appears. But probably the most concise answer, he says, is this from Yevgeny Levchenko. In short, barrels are A, large, B, highly stressed objects, with C, complex internal geometry manufactured of D, special high strength, high purity, and high homogeneity steels, to E, tight tolerances using F, specialized processes and equipment. In other words, the raw materials they need have to be significantly precise and are expensive and are difficult to get hold of, and the machines have to be exactly that, and the process is exactly that, and they arguably don't have the ability to have any of that working, certainly at reasonable levels, if at all, right? And so the Russians' ability to replace the losses in terms of artillery is highly constrained, and they appear only to be able to cannibalize old stocks to get newer things working. And there was also some stuff, I'll find this out. There was another tweet that's really, really relevant. Here it is. So this doesn't help Russia at all. Russia's having problems obtaining regular wear out parts. So parts that wear out on their artillery pieces, such as bearings in particular. And we heard from the beginning of the war that their access to bearings for things like rolling stocks in their rail network is a huge problem for them, because they are sanctioned, and a lot of them come from places like Sweden, who are like, nah, you ain't having that. They're having to obtain lower quality, cheap Chinese bearings that don't last as long. Older guns use different ammo as well. Might be 122 mil, but it's a different type of shell. So there you go. It is difficult for the Russians, I think, to sustain the losses in terms of artillery, at least, that they're experiencing. And the question is going to be really, how long have they got left to be able to dip into those stocks? How long will those stocks maintain their artillery use? So it's not just about ammunition; it's about the pieces, and then about the replacement of the parts of those pieces. So yeah, you can get an artillery piece that's brand new, and you can fire it loads, and then eventually you need to replace a barrel. And if you can't get a new barrel, if you can't make new barrels, then you have to cannibalize that, and then the thing that you're bringing in is of lower quality than the stuff you started with. So it's all about this gradual degradation of the Russian capabilities. Anyway, that's enough for military equipment and aid. I'm going to get on with the geopolitical video now.